Hello, and welcome back to the world of Wysteria. This evening, we will continue the tale with Chapter 21. Wysteria, Chapter 21. I still think you're giving me more credit than I deserve, Will maintained. I'm not sure that I actually changed the structure of anything. At least, that's not what I tried to do. Please explain, said Jeremy. As I was falling, I didn't think there was time to alter the ground, even if I had the skill, he replied. But I decided that I didn't need to, because it wasn't solid. It wasn't anything yet. What it looked like on the surface had been determined, but the underlying structure was still in a state of flux, or indeterminacy, as physicists say. It wouldn't become soft or hard until I landed on it. And until I did, both possibilities existed. Since I believed it was possible that the ground would be forgiving, I could imagine it. You've gotten to the heart of the matter, said Jeremy, though you may not see it. All things exist in a state of flux. Some outcomes are less probable, but the odds are never zero. Given enough energy, anything is possible. All creation is essentially the same, Will. One of many possibilities is brought into existence. Your skill as a creative mind lies in your ability to change the odds and, thus, determine which possibility actually emerges. At this point, Emily stood up. Sorry, are you getting bored? Will asked her. No, she said. It's all interesting stuff. It's just a little overwhelming. You boys continue with your building talk. I think I'll stretch my legs a bit. I think we've spoken enough about this subject for now, said Jeremy, as he and Will rose to their feet. No, she protested. Please finish your conversation. I'm going to go watch the falls for a while. Maybe the Naiad will show herself today. Then, giving Will a wink, she turned and skipped off through the trees toward the falls. Once Emily was out of range, Will took the opportunity to ask Jeremy whether he'd heard anything new regarding the Nathan situation. No, he replied. I haven't made any direct inquiries, though. I thought it would be best to let things lie. Well, I suppose no news is good news, Will remarked. Perhaps, said Jeremy, as they began walking, moving at a leisurely pace in the direction Emily had gone. It seems quiet. Isn't that a good thing? Will asked. Jeremy took a dozen slow steps, staring at the ground before answering. I remember the moments leading up to a battle, forming and fortifying our lines as we watched the other side do the same. The flurry of activity, the mounting tension, and then the pause, the eerie stillness wherein one might enjoy a last moment of mortal peace, listening for the command that would break the calm and unleash the storm. Let us hope it is a good thing. Will wasn't sure how to respond to Jeremy's little pep talk. He simply nodded and said yes, grateful that Emily wasn't present to hear it. Out of curiosity, which war were you involved in? Will asked him. Your American Civil War, he answered. The war between the states. It was a surprising revelation. So, you're American then? Will queried. It seemed to him that Jeremy's rather proper speech carried a faint British accent. I was English by birth, Jeremy told him, adopting America as my home when I was a young man. When the conflict broke out, I considered returning to England, but in the end, I stayed. So, which side did you fight for? Will asked. An answer to that, he replied, would mean little without further explanation. Will wasn't sure whether this meant that an explanation was forthcoming or that there would be none. But with each step they took in silence, it seemed the latter was more likely. They had now nearly caught up with Emily, who stood by the edge of the ravine, throwing stones in a high arc, then watching them fall into the river below. She looked ready to make another toss when Jeremy called out to her. Throwing rocks at the Naiad, are you? Emily turned and smiled. No, she said, no sign of her today. Just watching things fly. Look, she exclaimed. It's Will, leaping over the canyon. She then hurled the stone as far as she could toward the opposite bank. Oh no, she cried theatrically, as the rock began descending, far short of its mark. Poor little Will, he was so young. Said Will. I wonder if little Emily would make it over. She spun around and pointed a scolding finger at him. Don't you dare, she said. I don't feel like playing kite today. I don't know, he teased. It might be good practice. Actually, said Jeremy, it might. What? She yelped. Find another stone, Emily, he told her. Another stone? She asked warily. Yes, he said. Please try again. Another throw. Emily then began perusing the ground, searching for a suitable projectile. And Will, he continued, please help her this time. Help her find a rock, he asked. No, said Jeremy. Help her get the rock to the other side, as an exercise. Ah, I see, said Will. Using the wind. If you wish, he responded. That would be one possibility. The choice is yours. Got one, said Emily, picking up a stone and showing it to Will. Ready? Hold on, he said. 3, 2, 1. Give me a second to... Blast off, she cried, letting it fly. Come up with a plan, Will mumbled. Having no time to consider other options, Will summoned a gust of wind from the canyon below, hoping to keep the object airborne. For a moment, it seemed to work. The stone was flying farther than the others she'd thrown. But then it started to fall. It's too dense, he thought. The object didn't have enough surface area for the wind to keep it aloft. Either the wind had to be much stronger, or... Quickly, Will imagined that the rock was actually hollow, with a shell the thickness of tissue paper, virtually weightless, and able to sail on the slightest breeze. Almost immediately, the stone began rising, but since it had lost nearly all of its forward momentum, the wind now carried it straight up. "Wow, I've got quite an arm," Emily jokingly bragged, as they watched the small, dark speck flutter higher and higher. Will hastily redirected the current so that it pushed the rock forward. Then, once it had cleared the chasm, he gradually calmed the wind until the air was all but still. The stone seemed to hesitate for a moment, hovering high above the ground, then began a leisurely descent. "Looks like it will have a softer landing than you did," Emily quipped, as it slowly floated down. "Maybe," said Will, now imagining that the rock was once again a rock, a solid, heavy object. It then dropped to the ground, as it properly should, like a stone. Judging by his expression, Jeremy seemed puzzled, intrigued at least, by the stone's eccentric performance. "Now, how did you do that?" Emily asked. "I heard and felt the blast of wind, so I understand that part of it. But the way the stone behaved, the way it danced around in the air, then floated, then fell, was it all done with the wind?" "No," he answered. "The wind wasn't strong enough to carry it across." "So you did something to the rock too?" she proposed. "You, I don't know, gave it little wings or attached a small rocket to it?" "No," he said, smiling. "I don't think I could do that." "You didn't change the outward appearance of the stone," Jeremy struck in, now offering his analysis. "Just as you didn't alter the appearance of the ground on which you landed." "So you cheated," Emily declared. "Again." Will laughed. "I guess so." He then explained to them what he'd actually done. "Well," she said, "I suppose if you could guarantee me a nice soft landing like that, I might consider letting you launch me over." "I'm afraid he would need your help, my dear," said Jeremy. "Will could employ the wind, as he did during his own flight, but he cannot alter your body. Of course, you can." "Maybe theoretically," she replied, "but you simply have to be willing to practice," he told her. "How?" she asked. Jeremy thought for a moment. "I believe you were correct in saying that body control comes more naturally to builders," he said. "At least the concept is familiar to us. We can understand it in terms of other experiences we've had. For you, it is different. You will have to find the key yourself." Emily sighed. "But," he continued, backing up a few steps, "here is an exercise." Jeremy bent his knees, squatting slightly, and took a deep breath. Then, Straightening both legs and driving his feet down against the earth, he leapt high into the air, perhaps 15 feet straight up. When it seemed his jump had reached its zenith, Jeremy hung there, nearly motionless for a second or two. Then, as if the unseen tether suspending him in space had suddenly been snipped, he dropped. Will winced, anticipating a bone-shattering landing. But instead, it was the ground that seemed to suffer, for it trembled from the impact, nearly knocking Will and Emily off their feet. Jeremy seemed unaffected by the force of the collision, even though he had landed stiff-legged, making no attempt to cushion the shock to his body. Something about him did look different, though. He seems smaller, thought Will. He then realized why. Jeremy's feet had penetrated several inches into the soil. "Wow," said Emily. "It felt like an elephant hit the ground." "Or a train car," Will remarked. Smiling, Jeremy took a step forward, rising to his full height as he did so. Emily began laughing, pointing at the 2 foot-shaped depressions he'd left in the ground. "Practice," said Jeremy. "Both of you. But remember, Will, with this exercise, you should not manipulate the world in any way. You are trying to learn body control." "What exactly did you do just now?" Will asked. "I altered my body, much as you altered Emily's stone," he replied. "As I jumped, I made myself lighter, not weightless, but nearly so." "But you fell so hard," said Emily, "and you weren't injured." "The body can be made heavier as well as lighter," he said. "I wanted to show you this. But you should be careful. Such a violent impact can be injurious. In addition to altering my weight, I made my body more solid, less delicate. That is a subtler skill." "I don't know how to go about altering anything," said Emily, "so I have no idea where to begin." "Begin by trusting that you can," Jeremy told her. "Your body has had the experience before. It may have seemed involuntary, but on some level you caused it to happen. Now you must intend it. It's a very useful skill, particularly for a traveler. And the key might just open other doors for you as well. Just practice, Emily," he said in conclusion. Emily nodded her head. "I will," she promised. "Good luck to both of you then," said Jeremy. "I will be in touch." "Are you leaving?" she asked, sounding surprised and disappointed. "I thought we might try some traveling today." "For the time being, it would probably be wise to stay within Wysteria," he said. "However, I do think you two should practice traveling together, within this world. Will must learn how to slip into the blackness. That is the first step." "Okay," said Emily hesitantly. "Is there anything else?" he asked. "I just wondered if there was any news," she asked. "No," he answered, glancing at Will. all is quiet. Okay, and thank you for joining me this evening, and stay tuned for chapter 22.